Pablo Escobar was born in 1949 and raised in Medellín, Colombia. This city would become the main stronghold of Escobar's operations, a fortress where he reigned supreme. For most of his life, he was the undisputed king of Medellín, a place where no one dared to act without his permission, not even the Colombian authorities. At the height of his power, Escobar controlled an astounding 80% of the global drug trade, aided by his notorious gang, the Medellín Cartel, named after the city itself. While there were many figures within this organization, Escobar stood as the absolute leader, the final word in all matters. But how did he ascend to such heights? In the beginning, Escobar was just an ordinary person, not born into wealth or power. His rise to infamy is akin to the success stories we often hear, those of individuals who started small, selling newspapers or launching businesses from garages, eventually becoming CEOs of major corporations. Escobar's journey mirrored these tales, but he took a far darker path. It is said that his initial foray into crime involved stealing gravestones. Recognizing their value, he would pilfer them, erase the names, and sell them. However, he soon realized that this venture wouldn't yield the fortune he desired. Driven by ambition, Escobar decided to take a more aggressive approach to business. After much deliberation, he identified armed robbery as the quickest route to wealth. He would don a mask, hop on his bike, and target stores he had pre-selected, executing the heist in under 30 seconds. His method was simple: enter, brandish a gun, intimidate the staff, grab the cash, and flee. After several successful heists, he brought in his cousin to assist. One would ride while the other executed the thefts, and their operation flourished for months. Yet, Escobar craved more. He sought bigger scores and easier money. This desire led him to establish a relationship with a prominent car dealer. Before selling cars, the dealer would make copies of the keys and pass them to Escobar along with the buyers' addresses. Under the cover of night, Escobar would easily steal the cars from their new owners' driveways. Though cautious, he was eventually caught during one of these thefts in his early 20s. His incarceration lasted several months, but it proved to be a turning point, exposing him to the lives of seasoned criminals and the lucrative worlds of kidnapping and drug trafficking. Upon his release, Escobar returned to car theft, collaborating once again with his cousin Gustavo. However, they weren't the only thieves in Medellín. Competition was fierce. Seeing an opportunity, Escobar began selling insurance to car buyers, promising them protection against theft. His violent reputation preceded him, allowing him to reassure customers that their cars would remain safe, not just from him, but from any criminal element in the city. This insurance scheme flourished despite its dubious nature. People felt compelled to buy coverage as car theft became rampant. Escobar's influence grew, and he recognized that kidnapping could be even more profitable. One of his notorious abductions involved a wealthy businessman named Diego Javier. This businessman was despised by the working class in Medellín due to widespread layoffs in his factories. After Escobar and his gang kidnapped him, they demanded a $50,000 ransom, a hefty sum in Colombia at the time. Though the family complied, Escobar and his crew ultimately strangled Javier and disposed of his body, a violent act that only enhanced Escobar's notoriety and popularity among the impoverished. By employing a calculated method to violence, Escobar demonstrated a ruthless efficiency that set him apart in the criminal underworld. This strategic approach would become evident in the unfolding chapters of his life. In 1971, at the age of 22, Escobar entered a realm that would irrevocably alter his destiny: the drug trade. Initially working for a major drug dealer in Medellín named Fabio Restrepo, Escobar began smuggling small amounts of drugs. But such limitations didn't satisfy him. He was driven by an insatiable desire for more. He expanded his operations, traveling to Ecuador, the primary source of raw cocaine. There, he acquired significant quantities of cocaine paste, which he brought back to Colombia to be refined into the powder form that would flood international markets. With his ambitions flourishing, Escobar forged alliances with smugglers and quickly established himself as a formidable player in the drug trade. From his first operation, he earned nearly $100,000, a sum that solidified his resolve to specialize in this lucrative industry. Shortly after, Fabio Restrepo was murdered, and overnight Escobar became the preeminent drug lord in Medellín. While the circumstances of Restrepo's death remain murky, it was widely speculated that Escobar had a hand in it, a suspicion that only bolstered his reputation among both allies and adversaries. By 1976, at 26 years old, Escobar married Maria Victoria, who was just 15 at the time. With a wife, fortune, and power at his disposal, everything seemed to be falling into place. In the late 1970s, the drug trade surged in the United States, with Escobar and his gang smuggling massive quantities of narcotics across borders. He amassed a fleet of planes, enabling a relentless flow of drugs to American markets. The pilots working for him could earn upwards of $500,000 per flight, transporting tons of cocaine, each plane capable of carrying 11 tons. However, 2 months after his marriage, Escobar and 4 of his associates were arrested while returning from Ecuador with a substantial drug shipment. The weight of the evidence against him suggested a long prison sentence loomed. Faced with this grim reality, Escobar's first instinct was to bribe the judge overseeing his case. Unfortunately for him, the judge was incorruptible, refusing the bribe and insisting on a fair trial, an outcome Escobar could not tolerate. Desperate to escape his predicament, he learned that the judge's brother was a lawyer and exploited this knowledge, offering the lawyer a handsome sum to represent him. This move effectively coerced the judge into stepping aside from the case. Since his brother was the lawyer for the individual he was trying, a conflict of interest arose. The judge ultimately stepped down due to this familial connection, leading to the appointment of a new judge, one who, unlike his predecessor, had no qualms about accepting bribes. Fortuitously for Escobar, he was able to pay off this new judge, resulting in his release from prison along with his men, as if nothing had ever happened, and despite their involvement in smuggling a vast amount of cocaine. The scale of the drug trade in Colombia was staggering. Between 1976 and 1980, deposits in banks doubled, largely due to the influx of cash from drug trafficking. It's important to note that Escobar himself did not deposit his money in banks. Most of it remained in cash, hidden in various locations. In fact, much of Escobar's wealth is still concealed in places unknown today. The profits generated from the drug trade that Escobar facilitated were immense. Escobar capitalized on this wealth to dominate the drug industry. He purchased drug farms in Ecuador, Panama, and other South American countries, effectively taking control of the source of raw cocaine. Instead of merely buying the materials, he acquired the means of production. The process of converting raw cocaine into a consumable powder took place in Colombia, at his headquarters in Medellín. At that time, it was estimated that Escobar controlled 80% of the global drug trade. His wealth and power reached unprecedented levels in this field. However, Escobar's ambitions didn't stop there. He was determined to enhance his reputation among the populace. Leaders of drug gangs understood that if the public, particularly the poor, turned against them, their reign would end. To maintain their favor, they often engaged in community improvement. In Medellín, Escobar did the unthinkable for his people. He constructed schools, churches, playgrounds, nursing homes, and entertainment venues, including upscale restaurants and nightclubs. He transformed Medellín from a struggling city into one brimming with joy and vibrancy. This had a significant effect on public perception. Many residents came to see him as their savior. To this day, some people regard Pablo Escobar as a benevolent figure. He managed to bribe every police officer in Medellín, every single one. If anyone refused his bribes, they faced immediate death. Consequently, Escobar became the undisputed king of Medellín. No one could act without his approval. His infamous quote, "Plata o plomo," which translates to silver or lead, summed up the grim choices people faced. Accept Escobar's money or risk losing their lives. The extent of his bribery was not limited to Medellín or Colombia. It spread throughout all the countries where Escobar operated, including various South American nations and even parts of the United States. This pervasive corruption was instrumental in building his empire, making him the largest drug lord in history. Escobar's wealth escalated at an alarming rate, eventually placing him among the richest individuals in the world. Forbes magazine ranked him as the 7th richest man globally, estimating his fortune at around $30 billion. Some close to Escobar claimed that this estimate was grossly understated, suggesting that his true wealth was far greater. This was particularly striking given that $30 billion was a vast sum decades ago, when the purchasing power of money was significantly higher. It is conceivable that Escobar could be the richest man in modern history, though definitive documentation of his wealth is elusive. His affluence was evident in his lifestyle. Escobar owned lavish palaces and villas, even in the United States, and possessed fleets of luxurious cars and private planes. He spared no expense on himself, his family, or his associates, indulging in an opulent lifestyle. One of his extravagant projects included building a private zoo at one of his Colombian estates, filled with exotic animals that were not native to the region. Escobar was reveling in the life of excess afforded by his extraordinary wealth. Having amassed such power and fortune, Escobar turned his attention to politics. His primary motivation was to thwart the extradition treaty that would allow Colombian criminals to be sent to the United States. Given that America was the most affected by the drug trade, it consistently sought to collaborate with Colombian authorities to apprehend traffickers. However, due to corruption, these criminals often evaded justice, as Escobar himself had when he bribed the judge during his arrest. In response to the growing pressures, the Colombian parliament sought to create a law enabling the extradition of drug traffickers to the United States. Escobar decided to enter politics, running for the House of Representatives to oppose this legislation. Thanks to his popularity among the public, he successfully secured a seat in Parliament, making him a member of the House of Representatives in Colombia. Everyone was aware of Escobar's true nature and the industry he operated within, yet few dared to confront him. His parliamentary position granted him judicial immunity, shielding him from prosecution under Colombian law. Furthermore, his membership provided him with a diplomatic visa, allowing him to travel to the U.S. without restriction. He began taking his family on frequent trips to America, even purchasing a large mansion in Miami. Escobar's political career was marked by contradiction, and it was not destined to last long. One courageous parliamentarian, Rodrigo Lara, bravely spoke out against him, leading a media campaign that garnered significant attention in Parliament and beyond. This activism was a key factor in the swift dismantling of Escobar's political facade. Before long, he was expelled from the new Liberal Party, losing his judicial and diplomatic immunity and becoming vulnerable to prosecution. As authorities began tightening their grip on him, they seized some of his properties, including many of the exotic animals from his private zoo, citing their illegal importation. The Catholic Church, which had previously offered him support due to his charitable initiatives, publicly withdrew its backing. It seemed as though all the forces Escobar had once managed to align against his enemies were now turning against him. The Colombian government, spurred on by public outrage and legislative pressure, moved swiftly to draft a treaty for the extradition of criminals to the United States. This development was profoundly alarming for Escobar and his fellow traffickers, as extradition meant certain doom for them. Rodrigo Lara, who had campaigned tirelessly against Escobar and had been pivotal in the extradition treaty, eventually became Minister of Justice, focusing all his efforts on passing the law. However, tragedy struck in May 1984, when Rodrigo Lara was assassinated, shot 7 times in his car. This act signaled the beginning of a brutal war declared by Escobar against the Colombian government. In response, U.S. President Ronald Reagan announced a crackdown on drug traffickers, recognizing the escalating drug crisis in America. Following Lara's assassination, Colombian authorities were prepared to collaborate closely with their American counterparts to confront the ever-growing threat posed by Escobar and his men. Escobar found himself in a precarious position. Public sentiment began to turn against him, as the fallout from the assassination tarnished his carefully cultivated reputation. As he faced mounting pressure from the authorities and discontent among the populace, Escobar made the decision to flee the country. He sought refuge in various South American nations, such as Panama and Nicaragua. However, his absence from Colombia began to erode his ability to control the Medellín Cartel. Though Escobar was the undisputed leader, his lack of presence created instability within the gang. As weeks and months passed, his grip on power weakened, culminating in a crisis when one of Escobar's rivals kidnapped his father. Outraged, Escobar commanded his private army to retaliate against any parties suspected of being involved in the abduction. In a violent campaign of retribution, Escobar's men targeted anyone they believed to be associated with the kidnapping. Ultimately, he succeeded in recovering his father without paying a ransom, but this incident underscored the urgency of his return to Colombia to regain control. With resolve, Escobar returned to Colombia, ready to engage in an all-out war against the government. Yet, even in Medellín, where his influence was firmly established, the authorities and security personnel remained in his pocket, and he believed himself untouchable. Escobar could move freely in his city, untouched by the law. His main battle during the mid-'80s was against the judicial system, particularly targeting judges who supported extradition treaties to the United States, his greatest fear. Over this period, Escobar orchestrated the assassination of around 30 judges. In November 1985, Escobar paid $1 million to a group of armed mercenaries known as M-19, ordering them to storm the Palace of Justice, the highest judicial institution in Colombia, and take its officials hostage. The situation spiraled into chaos, culminating in the deaths of 11 out of 24 Supreme Court judges and 40 members of the mercenary group. The violence escalated, with killings between security forces and gangs becoming commonplace, prompting the declaration of an emergency law across the state. It was as if a war raged, with neither side able to gain control. Escobar, the most wanted man in the country, was perpetually on the run, exhausted from the constant movements and evasion tactics. Eventually, this relentless state of affairs led to negotiations between Escobar and the Colombian government. He agreed to cease violence and all criminal activities, surrendering himself on the condition that he could build his own prison and appoint his guards. This unreasonable demand, however, was reluctantly accepted by the authorities, desperate to end the violence and crime. In 1991, Escobar constructed a private prison named La Catedral, and began serving his sentence. This prison, however, resembled a luxury hotel rather than a correctional facility, featuring playgrounds, jacuzzis, bars, and top-notch dining services. All the guards were his men, allowing him to live in comfort rather than the hardships of a true prison life. Despite these arrangements, Escobar never ceased his drug trafficking activities. He continued running operations from within La Catedral, violating the terms of his agreement. As the authorities prepared to transfer him to a conventional prison, Escobar anticipated this move and fled before they could reach him. Following his escape, a group of armed volunteers known as Los Pepes, people oppressed by Escobar, joined Colombian and American security forces in the hunt for him. This group consisted of individuals whose lives had been shattered by Escobar's reign, and they were ready to bear arms against him. They launched a violent campaign, eliminating hundreds of Escobar's men and even targeting the families of his associates. Los Pepes employed a brutal strategy reminiscent of Escobar's own methods, killing indiscriminately, even those unrelated to the gang. This marked a stark reversal of fortune for Escobar, whose empire was crumbling as the group dismantled his operations. On December 2, 1993, with assistance from American security forces utilizing advanced technology, they traced Escobar's location through radio communication with his family. A team stormed a house in a Medellín neighborhood where he was hiding. As they broke through the door, gunfire erupted between the team and Escobar's guards. In a desperate attempt to escape through a window and onto the rooftops, Escobar was pursued and shot dead on the spot. This was the ignoble end of history's most notorious drug lord. After amassing immense wealth and inflicting widespread violence and corruption, he met his fate with a bullet. Notably, around 25,000 Colombians attended his funeral, viewing him as a sort of Robin Hood, a savior who had aided them. However, no matter how they remember him, history will forever mark him as a significant criminal. Thank you for watching this documentary. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and join us for the next video. Goodbye.